Rain glazed the cobblestones in a soft, relentless curtain, turning the London street into a dim mirror of carriages, umbrellas, and blurred silhouettes. Miss Arabella Wynne moved through it with her shawl hugged close, her skirts darkened by the downpour, her breath marked by a faint tremor she tried valiantly to subdue. She had walked these streets many times, but never toward a destiny chosen by someone else. Never toward a mansion whose door she was meant to knock upon only because her sister had slipped away under the veil of night. The city seemed to sense her unease. Shopkeepers paused mid-conversation, carriage drivers narrowed their eyes, and a cluster of well-dressed ladies halted beneath a canopy, whispering behind gloved hands. Arabella lowered her gaze, knowing full well what they murmured. The plain Wynne girl, the forgotten one, the sister they sent instead. When she reached the towering residence of the Duke of Ashford, she paused under the stone archway, breath misting in the cold air. Lantern light shimmered through the windows, casting shifting gold patterns upon marble floors she had never seen. The butler, a lean man with silvering hair, opened the door before she could summon her courage. His gaze swept over her dripping attire, her reddened hands, the small basket she carried. "Miss Wynne," he said with a tone that hovered between courtesy and confusion. "We expected another." Arabella forced a small nod, whispering that her sister had departed unexpectedly and that she herself had come to fulfill the winter's appointment as cook. The butler's brow tightened, but he stepped aside. "His Grace will wish for an explanation." As she stepped inside, the mansion seemed to swallow sound. Portraits of Ashford's past lined the hallway, each face stern, dignified, watching. Arabella felt their judgment pressing down like a weight upon her shoulders. She followed the butler through a series of polished corridors until they reached a study lit by a single hearth. There, Duke Sebastian Ashford stood with arms folded, tall, sharply cut, a man whose presence seemed carved from stormlight and discipline. He turned slowly at their arrival, eyes narrowing with the faintest hint of irritation, or perhaps disappointment. "Miss Wynne," he said, voice crisp, "your sister was expected at dawn. Instead, I am informed she has absconded, leaving her duties unattended. And you have been sent in her stead." Arabella managed a quiet yes, her voice trembling under his unyielding scrutiny. "I can work, Your Grace. I only ask for the opportunity." The Duke paced toward her, his boots echoing across the floor, each step measured. He examined her with the dispassionate precision of a man accustomed to detecting flaws in everything he owned. "I do not employ sentiment," he murmured, "nor do I entertain disruptions. My kitchen requires order, skill, and absolute reliability. Beauty is irrelevant, but competence is not. Pray tell, Miss Wynne, do you possess any?" The question stung more deeply than she wished to show. Arabella lifted her chin, recalling years of preparing modest meals in her parents' humble home, though none had been crafted for noble taste. "I can learn quickly, Your Grace, and I will do all I can to honor the position." His eyes flickered as if weighing the honesty in her tone. Finally he stepped aside. "Very well. The staff will observe your efforts today. Should you prove adequate, you may remain." The kitchen roared with activity the moment she entered it. Pots clanged, flames licked the iron grates, and a chorus of doubtful glances followed her every movement. Arabella tied her apron, heart fluttering like a trapped bird, and began preparing a simple broth. Her hands shook at first, but the familiar rhythm slowly steadied her. Yet misfortune seemed intent on sweeping her feet. A pot she had placed too close to the fire began to boil over, releasing a plume of angry steam. Startled servants leapt back. A ladle clattered to the floor. One of the maids muttered under her breath that the Duke would have her sent away by nightfall. Arabella swallowed, fighting the wave of humiliation rising within her, determined to salvage what she could. But fate was unkind. A moment later, a small ember escaped the stove, landing upon a linen cloth and sending up a thin trail of smoke. The head chef rushed to beat it out, glaring fiercely at her. "If you wish to remain here, Miss Wynne," he hissed, "you must not set the kitchen aflame." Laughter snickered around her like snapping threads. Arabella's cheeks burned as she bent to retrieve the spilled ladle. When she rose, her breath caught. The Duke himself stood at the doorway, silent, unreadable, his arms folded once again. No one had seen him enter. Every servant fell still. Sebastian's eyes traveled from the scorched cloth to Arabella's trembling hands. The room felt suspended, the air strung tight as a violin string. She opened her mouth to speak, an apology, a plea, anything, but the words died upon her lips. The Duke stepped farther in, his expression impossibly composed. "A difficult first day, Miss Wynne?" She nodded faintly, unable to hide the shame pulsing through her. "It will not happen again, Your Grace." His gaze held hers a moment longer than expected, something unfathomable flickering beneath his controlled exterior, before he turned toward the staff. "Assist her," he ordered quietly. "She will try again tomorrow." As he left, whispers followed him, astonished, disbelieving, almost scandalized. No one could recall the Duke granting second chances. Arabella looked down at her hands, still trembling, yet carrying a strange warmth she did not understand. The smoke had faded, the servants resumed their rhythm, but a new tension hummed in the air, one born of curiosity, of rumor, of change beginning to stir in a place where nothing usually shifted. And though Arabella did not yet know it, the man who had walked away with such rigid poise had paused just beyond the door, his hand upon the wall, breath held in a moment of private contemplation. For reasons he could not yet articulate, he had not dismissed her. Not yet. And perhaps, he thought with a faint tightening in his chest, not ever. The following morning dawned with a frost that clung to the Duke's estate like a thin veil of silver lace. Arabella Wynne rose before the servant's bell, determined that no remnant of yesterday's humiliation would follow her into this new day. She tied her apron with steady hands, though her breath still trembled faintly, as if her very lungs remembered the scorch of shame. Yet something inside her, quiet, stubborn, long ignored, held firm. She would not be dismissed before she had earned her place. The kitchen, already humming with early preparations, fell into a hush when she entered. A few exchanged glances, others pretended she was invisible. Arabella offered no complaint. She went directly to the wooden table by the window, where pale morning light spilled across the surface, and began chopping vegetables with the careful precision she had practiced at home. Her movements grew smoother, her confidence pulling itself together like a frayed thread rewoven with purpose. By noon, even the skeptical maids had paused to taste her broth. One lifted her brows, surprised. "Rustic but pleasant," she murmured, as though unwilling to grant full praise. Still, the words steadied Arabella's heart more than she wished to admit. When the head chef instructed her to prepare a savory tart for His Grace's luncheon, she nodded without hesitation. Every motion became deliberate, reverent even. She folded pastry with respectful care, arranged herbs as if each leaf carried a prayer, and seasoned the filling with memory rather than measurement. When the tart was sent upstairs, carried by a footman whose expression suggested he expected catastrophe, Arabella remained perfectly still. Moments passed, then minutes. At last the footman returned, empty-handed, eyebrows raised. His Grace finished every bite. A ripple went through the room, half astonishment, half unease. It was no secret that the Duke rarely finished a dish and never commented on one. Yet though he offered no spoken praise, the message was clear enough to those who served him. Still, Arabella refused to grow comfortable. She moved with humility, careful not to appear proud, though warmth spread through her chest like the first hint of spring after an unyielding winter. Later that evening, when she found a torn linen handkerchief left on the work table, bearing the crest of Ashford, she hesitated before picking it up. The delicate fabric had snagged, leaving a small split along the seam. She turned it over in her hands, considering. It was foolish, perhaps even presumptuous, but she retrieved a tiny embroidery kit from her belongings and began mending the tear. To hide the seam, she stitched a discreet flame near the corner, no larger than a fingernail, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. A small tribute, she thought, to the man whose temper was whispered about through every corridor. She folded the handkerchief neatly and handed it to the butler to return to His Grace's study. The next morning, when Duke Sebastian Ashford emerged for his early ride, the handkerchief rested neatly in his breast pocket. Arabella saw it only accidentally, catching a glimpse as she carried a tray toward the back corridor. Her steps faltered, breath pausing in wonder. He wore it, openly, deliberately. Yet he said nothing. Not a nod. Not a glance. Still, she felt its significance like a quiet ember nestled beneath her ribs. The Duke's behavior shifted in ways subtle yet unmistakable. He lingered near the kitchen door in the late afternoons, hands clasped behind his back, pretending to inquire whether the staff had all they needed. His gaze drifted to Arabella more often than seemed necessary. Once, she caught him tasting a bit of sauce left cooling on a spoon, a gesture so uncharacteristic that even the head chef froze in disbelief. Sebastian offered no remark, only placed the spoon aside and strode out with a stiffness that betrayed more emotion than any spoken word. But change, however gentle, rarely escapes the claws of society. Lady Honoria Fairfax arrived one afternoon, stepping from her carriage with the air of a woman accustomed to being admired at every gathering. Her beauty was precise, calculated, golden curls framing a face sharpened by pride. She swept through the estate with the confident purpose of someone who believed the title of Duchess Ashford already belonged to her. As she paused near the kitchen entrance, she caught sight of Arabella handing a tray to a footman. Her lips curled in faint distaste. "So you are the replacement." The word fell like an insult dressed in silk. Arabella bowed her head respectfully, though her pulse quickened. Honoria's gaze drifted toward the dining hall, where the Duke's voice could be faintly heard giving instructions. "You must understand," Honoria murmured, stepping closer. "His Grace endures staff changes poorly. It is in your interest not to inconvenience him further." Her smile was thin. "Or believe you have caught his attention." Arabella nearly replied that she had no such intentions, but Honoria had already swept away, her perfume lingering like a warning. That evening, rumors began to coil through the manor. Whispers that the Duke had taken an unusual interest in the plain wind girl, that he visited the kitchen more frequently, that his handkerchief bore a feminine touch it had never previously carried. Arabella heard the murmurs as she washed dishes, each word tightening the knot of worry in her stomach. When dinner commenced, Sebastian surprised everyone by entering the hall, lifting his glass and calmly announcing, "Credit for tonight's meal belongs to Miss Wynne." A burst of shocked murmurs circled the table. Aristocrats shifted uncomfortably, frowning into their wine. Honoria's grip tightened on her fan. Arabella, standing behind a partition with the other staff, felt heat flood her cheeks. Gratitude, disbelief, dread, they tangled until she could scarcely breathe. Later that night, she passed the drawing room and froze as Honoria's raised voice spilled into the corridor. "You cannot favor her. It invites scandal. A duke must show better judgment." Sebastian's reply was low, a simmering flame. "I favor skill. And I dismiss no one at another's insistence." Arabella's heart thudded painfully. She knew then that she had become a danger, not only to herself but to him. The next morning, as she arranged herbs on the kitchen table, the butler entered with an awkward expression. "Miss Wynne," he announced, "His Grace requires your presence in the study." Her breath caught. The room grew still. As she followed the butler through the corridor, each step echoed with a feeling she could not name. Shame. Hope. Fear. Anticipation. When the door closed behind her, the Duke regarded her not with anger, but with an expression carved from curiosity and something perilously close to concern. "Miss Wynne," he began, voice measured, "you must be aware of the talk circulating among the ton." She nodded faintly. "I wish to know," he continued, stepping closer, "whether you regret remaining in my service." Her heart pounded. She searched his face and found no cruelty there, only a restrained fire waiting. Before she could answer, a faint shadow crossed his features, as though the truth of her reply mattered far more than propriety allowed. And the room fell silent, suspended at the edge of a question neither dared voice fully, though it threatened to change everything that followed. The storm began its slow ascent over the Ashford estate just as dusk settled, thick clouds gathering like a troubled conscience across the sky. By the time Arabella Wynne completed her duties for the evening, thunder had rolled through the valley with a low, mournful growl. She stood by the kitchen window, watching the first streaks of lightning claw across the heavens, illuminating the manor's gardens in pale, trembling light. The air inside was still warm with the remnants of supper preparations, yet a restlessness clung to her, an unease woven from the Duke's earlier question and the rumors that refused to quiet. Did she regret remaining in his service? She had not answered then, for fear her voice would betray a truth she herself had only lately begun to understand. And so, with the storm deepening outside, Arabella found herself moving through the quiet corridors, unable to escape the gravity of the unresolved moment. When she reached the library, the door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of golden lamplight spilling into the hall. She hesitated, intending to pass it by, but a soft sound within halted her. A breath, strained and unsteady. She pressed gently on the door. It opened with a muted sigh. Sebastian Ashford sat alone at the long mahogany table, a sealed letter resting before him, its edges worn from handling. Rain hammered the windows, wind rattled the panes, yet the Duke sat motionless, as though holding still was the only way to endure whatever storm lived inside him. His posture, usually so controlled, seemed burdened tonight. His shoulders drawn tight, his jaw clenched in a way that betrayed more anguish than anger. Arabella stepped inside before she fully realized her courage. "Your Grace, forgive me. I did not mean to intrude." He looked up sharply, surprise flashing through his dark eyes. For a heartbeat, he seemed on the verge of sending her away. But then something in his expression softened, as if he recognized that the battle he fought in solitude no longer wished to remain hidden. "Miss Wynne," he murmured, voice lower than usual, "the blame is mine. I ought to have locked the door if I wished for privacy." She moved closer, compelled by something stronger than propriety. "If you wish me gone, I will leave at once." He shook his head, slowly, heavily. "No. Stay." The word lingered between them, shaped not by command but by quiet need. Arabella's eyes drifted to the letter before him. The Duke followed her gaze, exhaling a breath that trembled more than he intended. He lifted the letter, turning it once between his fingers. "It is from my brother," he said, "written years ago." Arabella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. "Your brother?" "He died in a carriage accident on the northern road." Sebastian's voice had grown tight, frayed at the edges. "I was meant to be with him that night. He insisted on traveling alone. We argued before he left, and the last words spoken between us were steeped in bitterness." He set the letter down with a reverence bordering on grief. "I have never forgiven myself. And so, when the world calls me a fiery, temperamental man, I let them. It is simpler than confessing I am simply haunted." Arabella's heart pulled toward him with a tenderness she had not known she possessed. To see him stripped of the armor society believed he wore so effortlessly unsettled her deeply. "Your Grace," she whispered, "guilt is a cruel companion, but it is not the same as fault." He lifted his gaze to hers, and for once, the fierce Duke appeared human, vulnerable, undone by memories a decade old. "I have spent years mastering control, order, distance. Yet you—" He paused as though the words themselves were dangerous. "You disrupt all of it." Arabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I have never wished to cause you difficulty." A faint, weary smile touched his lips. "That is precisely the complexity of it." The storm roared outside, shaking the glass. Inside, a quieter storm gathered, fed by truths neither had dared speak. Sebastian rose slowly from his chair, approaching her with measured steps. Arabella held her breath, unable to look away. When he stood a few paces from her, the lamplight cast their shadows into a single tangle upon the floor. "And you, Miss Wynne," he said, voice soft but probing, "why did you hesitate to answer my question today?" She swallowed, clasping her hands to steady herself. "Because I feared the truth would seem presumptuous. Or foolish." "Tell me nonetheless." Her courage trembled, but she summoned it. "I do not regret remaining here, Your Grace. I only regret that my presence has brought you distress." He stepped closer, just enough that she could see the faint sheen of emotion in his eyes. "You have brought me disturbance, Miss Wynne, yes, but not distress." The words unraveled her composure. She looked away, overwhelmed, but Sebastian gently lifted her chin with a hesitant touch of his fingers. The gesture was intimate, yet restrained by a nobleman's discipline. He brushed a wayward curl behind her ear with the lightest sweep, so tender it felt like a confession. "I find nothing forgettable in you," he murmured. Her breath caught. "Your Grace." Their closeness hovered at the fragile edge of impropriety, but before either could retreat or advance, the library door swung open with a sharp crack. Lady Honoria Fairfax stood framed in the doorway, eyes widening at the sight of the Duke's hand near Arabella's cheek, the proximity between them irrefutable. She inhaled sharply. "Your Grace," she declared, voice slicing through the air, "half the household has seen Miss Wynne leaving this room at ungodly hours. Do you mean to disgrace your own name?" Arabella stepped back instantly, mortified, but Sebastian did not flinch. His face hardened, not with shame but with anger at the intrusion. "You presume too much, Lady Honoria," he said coldly. "I presume only what others have witnessed." Her gaze pierced Arabella like a blade. "This impropriety cannot continue." Honoria turned on her heel, skirts snapping behind her as she stormed down the hall, no doubt carrying the scandal to eager ears. When she vanished, the room felt suddenly smaller, the air more fragile. Sebastian looked at Arabella with an expression she could not decipher, part fury, part regret, part something far more dangerous. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we must speak again, before the entire household becomes our judge." Arabella nodded, though her pulse raced painfully. She knew that whatever came next would alter the delicate, unspoken bond between them. Outside, thunder cracked. Inside, two hearts stood at the brink of confession, yet stopped by the world waiting just beyond the door. Dawn broke with an austere stillness, the storm's remnants clinging to the eaves like faded memories. Arabella Wynne stood in the corridor outside the Duke's study, her hands clasped tightly before her, her pulse echoing the dread she had carried through the long, sleepless night. The scandal Lady Honoria had ignited now ran unchecked through the manor. Servants whispered behind half-closed doors, and even the footmen eyed Arabella with a blend of curiosity and pity. She had not intended to become the axis of such ruin, yet the murmurs had grown into something far larger than she could quiet. When the door finally opened, Duke Sebastian Ashford stood framed in the morning light. His expression was composed, yet something beneath that composure wavered, a crack in the armor. "Miss Wynne," he said, voice soft but unwavering, "come in." She stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a sound that felt like the sealing of fate. Sebastian moved to the center of the room, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on the hearth as though the flames might offer counsel for the weight he carried. "We must speak plainly," he began. "The scandal cannot be ignored. Honoria's words have spread beyond the manor walls. The tongue is already sharpening its appetite." Arabella swallowed. "Your Grace, if it is best for your reputation that I leave." "No," the refusal left him before she could finish. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze nearly stole her breath. "I will not permit society to dictate my household, nor will I dismiss you to appease their prejudice. But the whispers," she murmured, "they implicate you far more than me. It is unjust." His expression tightened. "I have lived beneath the scrutiny of the aristocracy my entire life. Their censure is not new to me. What is new, Miss Wynne, is my unwillingness to bend to it." He stepped closer. "And that begins with the truth." Arabella's breath trembled. "What truth, Your Grace?" He held her gaze with a steadiness that felt like a confession in itself. "That your presence unsettles me not through impropriety, but through meaning. You have brought warmth to a place long barren. You have stirred emotions I believed extinguished. To deny this now would be to live a lie." Her chest tightened, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his candor. She had never asked for his regard, never imagined she might hold a place within his guarded world. "Your Grace," she whispered, "I cannot bear to be the cause of further harm." "You are not harm," he said, stepping closer again. "You are the first light that has touched this house in years." A soft knock interrupted them. The butler entered with a hesitant bow. "Pardon, Your Grace. The guests for this evening's winter gathering have begun sending confirmation. Lady Honoria among them." Sebastian's eyes darkened. "Very well. Inform the staff to proceed. And ensure Miss Wynne's duties leave her visible." He glanced at Arabella, a decision already taking root in his expression. "If they wish to watch, then let them watch." When evening arrived, carriages lined the estate's front drive like polished jewels under lantern light. Snow from the storm had frozen into crystalline sheets that glittered beneath the footmen's torches. Arabella moved through the preparations with quiet efficiency, though unease wrapped itself around her like an unwelcome shawl. She felt every glance upon her, some curious, some sharp, some filled with thinly veiled disdain. The ballroom glowed with golden chandeliers, violinists played near the gallery, and aristocrats adorned in silks and velvet drifted through the room like elegant shadows. When the Duke entered, conversation faltered. His presence always commanded attention, but tonight he bore an air of resolve that made even the boldest hesitate. Arabella stood near the side table arranging garnishes, hoping to remain unseen. But Sebastian's voice cut across the music, steady and unmistakable. "Miss Wynne." Every head turned as he approached her. Arabella felt heat rise in her cheeks, her hands trembling as she lowered her gaze. "Your Grace." He extended his arm, publicly, unmistakably. "Walk with me." Silence rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. Lady Honoria froze mid-step, her fan hanging limp at her side. Murmurs erupted at once, scandalous and incredulous. Arabella hesitated, but Sebastian's expression held no doubt. With a slow breath, she placed her hand upon his arm. He led her through the length of the ballroom, each step measured, defiant, deliberate. The whispers sharpened, but Arabella felt only the firm, unwavering support beneath her fingers. When they reached the center of the room, he released her arm only to turn and face her completely. "Miss Wynne," he said quietly, though loud enough that those nearest could hear, "may I request the honor of a dance?" Her heart nearly stopped. "Your Grace, before all these people?" "They are precisely the people who must see it." The musicians, sensing the moment, shifted into a soft waltz. Arabella placed her hand in his, and he drew her into the dance, not with the possessive flourish society expected from a duke, but with a gentleness that spoke of something far deeper. The room faded. The whispers softened to a distant hum. Under the chandelier's golden glow, Sebastian held her as though she were something precious, something he feared to damage yet refused to release. When the dance ended, he bowed with courtly grace, eyes locked with hers in silent declaration. But as applause rose, not applause of approval but of spectacle, the steward hurried in with a sealed letter, face pale. "Your Grace, it is from the Royal Council." Sebastian accepted it, tore open the seal and read quickly. A muscle tightened in his jaw. Arabella's breath caught. "What does it say?" He folded the letter with deliberate calm, though fire burned behind his composed exterior. "They censure my behavior," he said quietly. "They disapprove of my attachment to a servant girl. They warn that further impropriety will force official action." Arabella stepped back, horror filling her. "Your Grace, I cannot let this continue. I will resign, tonight." "You will do no such thing." His voice, though soft, carried iron. "Let them come. I will not retract what is true." The room fell into a hush, guests watching the pair with wide, uncertain eyes. Sebastian turned toward her fully. "Arabella Wynne," he said, "I will face whatever consequences they bring. But I will not lose you to fear." Her breath trembled as she met his gaze, a gaze now stripped of all pretense, all restraint. And in that suspended moment, every whisper, every judgment, every threat from the outside world seemed to dissolve beneath the force of what stood between them. Honesty finally voiced, affection finally bared, and a resolve that neither scandal nor counsel could easily break. The music began again, but neither moved. The declaration had been made. The reckoning had only just begun. Snow fell in delicate spirals over the Ashford estate the following morning, a soft white shroud that seemed determined to disguise the unrest brewing within its walls. Arabella Wynne stood at the kitchen window, watching the flakes drift past the glass, her hands resting on the sill as though bracing herself against an unseen force. The Duke had made his declaration the previous night with a boldness that shook the foundations of propriety itself, but the repercussions had arrived swiftly, sealing themselves in the form of letters, warnings, and whispers that spread beyond the ballroom and into London's most scrutinizing circles. She had slept hardly at all, fearing each knock upon the door, each footstep in the corridor. When the butler appeared at the threshold, his expression grave, she knew the moment she dreaded had arrived. "Miss Wynne," he said quietly, "the Royal Council has arrived and demands His Grace's presence." Pause. "And yours?" Her breath caught. "Mine." "They insist upon hearing both accounts for the sake of clarity." His eyes softened despite his rigid posture. "I fear Lady Honoria has played her part with enthusiasm." Arabella steadied herself. She had not sought the Duke's attention, nor imagined that her mere presence might provoke such upheaval. But now she must stand in the center of the storm with the dignity she had carried her whole life, quiet, unremarked upon, and yet unbroken. The grand hall had been prepared with unnecessary severity. The councilmen, adorned in dark wool coats and stiff collars, formed a semicircle near the hearth where the Duke awaited them, his posture deceptively calm. The moment Arabella entered, Honoria's triumphant gaze swept over her like a blade. She stood slightly behind the council, her lips curved with cold satisfaction. Sebastian's eyes found Arabella instantly. A flicker of concern passed through them, but when he spoke, his voice bore the unwavering command of a man who had made peace with the cost of his choices. "Miss Wynne," he said softly, "please stand here." She stepped beside him, her hands clasped tightly at her waist. The eldest councilman cleared his throat. "Your Grace, the matter before us is not trivial. Rumors have spread that you have engaged in inappropriate familiarity with a woman in your employ, causing disruption to your estate and calling into question your judgment as Duke." Sebastian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The councilman turned to Arabella, his expression neither hostile nor kind, merely appraising. "Miss Wynne, do you confirm or deny that impropriety has occurred?" Arabella opened her mouth, closed it, gathered herself. "My lords," she began, voice quivering but earnest, "I have never sought the Duke's attention, nor have I encouraged behavior that would bring dishonor to him or this estate." She lifted her gaze, meeting each pair of eyes with trembling courage. "I came here only to fulfill a duty left undone by my sister. I have tried each day to serve with integrity. If my presence has invited scrutiny, it is out of misunderstanding, not misconduct." Honoria scoffed lightly. The eldest councilman raised a hand for silence. Arabella continued, her voice gaining steadiness. "I am aware that society views me as unremarkable, even unworthy of attention. But I assure you, I would never jeopardize the standing of the man who has shown me nothing but fairness and patience." Sebastian's breath shifted almost imperceptibly, as though her words pierced deeper than any accusation could. The elder councilman turned to him. Your Grace, the young woman has denied impropriety. Now you must speak. Do you confirm her account? Sebastian stepped forward. Every councilman straightened. Even Honoria's confidence faltered. I confirm, he said, that Miss Wynne has conducted herself with honor, humility, and devotion to duty. Any insinuation of impropriety originates not from her actions, but from society's inability to fathom that worth may exist outside of beauty or lineage. A murmur ran through the room. He continued, voice sharpening with the force of conviction he had restrained for far too long. I will make myself exceedingly clear. I hold Miss Wynne in high esteem. My regard for her is not born of impropriety, but of admiration. If there is fault, it lies with me, for failing to guard her from the cruelty of gossip, for allowing others to reduce her to caricature. His gaze flicked to Honoria, pointed and unflinching. And for permitting envy to speak louder than truth. Honoria's face drained of color. A councilman stepped forward, troubled. Your Grace, you speak with passion, but passion does not excuse recklessness. Sebastian replied, it is not recklessness to defend a woman unjustly accused. It is duty. The elder councilman exchanged glances with his peers. Then he addressed both of them with a gentler tone. Miss Wynne, Your Grace, society will always discuss what it does not understand. Yet we must determine whether this attachment jeopardizes your position, Duke Ashford. Arabella's breath caught. Sebastian's jaw set. The councilman paused, then sighed. But it is evident Miss Wynne has no ambitions toward your title, and just as evident that you, Your Grace, have chosen honesty over concealment. He folded his hands. We will not pursue formal censure. Honoria gasped. My lord, you cannot be serious, she. You have done enough, Lady Fairfax, the elder councilman said sharply. And your involvement in spreading rumor with ill intent is noted. Honoria's outrage trembled into silence. The councilmen gathered their coats, muttering among themselves before offering curt bows and departing. When the last of them stepped outside, leaving the hall quiet once more, Arabella felt her knees weaken with relief. Sebastian exhaled slowly, tension slipping from his frame as though he had been holding the entire estate upon his shoulders. He turned to her, truly turned, his expression no longer the mask of a duke defending his position, but the face of a man who had just bared his heart before every possible judge. Arabella, he said softly, I meant every word. She felt her breath falter, trembling at the edge of something she was afraid to name. Your Grace, you risked so much. For truth, he murmured. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, slow and deliberate as though blessing the moment. Sebastian extended his hand. Not as a duke offering command, but as a man offering his future. Will you walk with me? He asked. Arabella hesitated only long enough to feel the depth of her own longing settle, warm and steady, in her chest. Then she placed her hand in his. They stepped into the winter garden together, lanterns flickering like distant stars, the night quiet except for the soft hush of snow beneath their feet. Arabella no longer walked as someone sent in her sister's place. She walked as someone chosen.